Chapter 7, Lesson 4, find the percent of a number mentally. Now before we begin, you have a chart in your notes, and what I'd like for you to do is to see how many of those percents you know the fraction that they equal. Okay, so let's go through them very quickly. Make sure you've paused the video and filled in that chart with what you know. 25% is 1/4, 50% is 1/2, 75% is 3/4, 100% is 1, 20% is 1/5, 40% is 2/5, 60% is 3/5, 80% is 4/5, 10% is 1/10, 30% is 3/10, 70% is 7/10, 90% is 9/10. The next column, 12.5% is 1/8, 37.5% is 3/8, 62.5% is 5/8, and 87.5 is 7/8. The last column, 16 2/3 is 1/6, 33 1/3% is 1/3, 66 2/3% is 2/3, and 83 1/3% is 5/6. Now, when we want to find the percent of a number mentally, we have a couple different methods we're going to look at today. And the first method we're going to look at is use a fraction. So we just filled in that big chart. And we're going to use what we know about fractions to find percents of a number. So let's look at some examples. So 75% of 24. So 75% is 3/4. Remember, if we know 1/4, we can easily find 3/4. So 1/4 of 24 is 6. So 3/4 is 18. 80% of 60. So 80 is 8/10 or 4/5. So 1/5 of 60 is 12. And 12 times 4 is 48. Okay, the second method that we're going to look at is sometimes we want to use decimals. So we're going to use decimals. And what we mean by decimals is when we are finding like 10% or 1% specifically. And how we do that is 10% just means we take that decimal of 76 and we move it over one place. So 10% of 76 is 7.6. 1%, we move it over two places. So 1% of 122, 2 places, is 1.22. Okay, our third method that we're going to look at is we are going to use our 10%, right? So we're going to use this when we want to find 20% or 30% or 40%, or maybe even if we want to find 15% or 35%, right? Because we can remember that 15 is 10% and then another half of that 10%. So let's look at some examples. So 20% of 110. So 20% is 2 10%. And so 10% of 110, move the decimal, is 11. So 11 plus 11 is 22. Okay, 30% is 10% times 3. So 10% of 50, move that decimal point one place, is 5. And 3 of those is going to be 15. All right, and our last method we're going to look at is just estimate. Now, sometimes an estimate is not okay, but a lot of times when we have percents, we're just going to estimate and try and get close to something. We can estimate the percents, and we can estimate the number that we're finding the percent of. So let's look at some examples. So 25% of 64. Well, what I can say is, well, this is about 25%, pretty close, of 64. So if I take 64, well, that's like 1/4 of it. So 1/4 of 64 is 16. And so we can say that about 26% of 64 is 16. I know that 26% is going to be a little bit bigger than that, but probably not much. Okay, if I have 2/3% of 891, well, 2/3% is really just about 1%. And 891, well, that's really close to 900. So 1% of 900 is 9. But I know that I only want 2/3 of that, so 2/3 of 9 is 6. And so 2/3% of 891, because I'm going to do 2/3 of that 9, 1/3 is 3, so 2/3 is 6. All right, and a couple more examples. So 40% of 81. I would say, well, 40%, that's an easy one to find. 81 is about 80. So 40% is, I can either do it by my tens or I can do it by a fraction. I can say that's 2/5, or I can say that, well, 10% is 8, so 40% is going to be about 32. And then if I have 120% of 51, well, let's say this is about 50. Well, 100% is the whole 50, and then 20% is 2 tens, and 10%, move that decimal, is 5, so that's 10, so 120% would be about 60.